this is actually the first for the Ogden Potter's House podcast. 2 in a row. Coffee's brewed. Late night podcast. I think if people in the world can do it for 3 hours, I think we got it. I think we're good. I'm just a little tired, but we're making it through. It's good. How are you feeling today?
I feel good. I'm excited to, it's been a long time coming. I'm excited to just talk about some things and
You nervous?
Kind of. I am now. I wasn't before, but I am now.
Don't be nervous. I think I always tell everybody, I'm like, don't even think of it as like you're being recorded, or just be yourself and tell your story. I mean,
yeah,
I've known most of it.
uh-huh.
I've heard chunks. I've heard bits and pieces, but nobody knows your story as authentically and real as you do.
Right.
I think you have a powerful testimony and a beautiful story. I just got done doing a podcast with your husband, and it's awesome, everything that you guys have gone through. And I want to take the audience through all of that as much as you're comfortable sharing. Tell me a little bit about the very beginning. You grew up in church. What was the family dynamic like growing up?
Right. So, growing up in church, honestly, it was such a privilege, especially in those beginning days. Especially coming out of this week of conference, just seeing all that God has done and remembering back, like when the church was much smaller and it was impossible for us. Like we've always talked about what went on this last week at the conference and sending out churches and things like that. It was always talked about, but it was like one of those things you talked about, but it was like, like, will it really happen? So it's kind of cool to just see it coming to fruition and things like that. But growing up in church, there was a lot of us kids. And like, yeah, I just remember always being drugged to church, and I don't remember ever like being like, church again. As a little kid, it was always exciting to get out the house and go to church. Papa Bear was obviously very authoritative. He was very strict growing up, so there was a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to do, but I didn't even really know what I was missing out on until I got older and got around my peers, and of course they made the world seem fun and exciting, but as a little kid I didn't know what I was missing out on.
Yeah,
because it was all I knew. Church was all I knew.
Do you remember some of the people that were going when you were like 5 years old?
I remember Ross. I remember Morrow. He always used to give me gum. I wasn't allowed to chew gum, but he'd always give me gum. I remember getting whooped by Pastor Bart and Robin. It was just like Ogden is a family, has that family vibe now, but being a baby church and a smaller church, like that family vibe, it was just so prevalent and prominent. And it was just like, it's crazy because now that we're out pioneering, it's like the same vibe. Like, it's just like full circle, and, sometimes I'm having like flashbacks, but yeah, I remember doing the haunted houses, like right there on Grant, and we would line up the whole church with plastic, black plastic, and people would line would wrap around the building, and we'd have this one guy who had like never cut his hair, never shaved. He was like this hippie old guy. He never cut his hair or shaved his beard, and he always played Jesus, and he had a big old beer belly. It was hilarious. But yeah, so
growing up in church, would you say you were a good kid? Like just I'd say like what, elementary, junior high?
Yeah, I don't think I was a bad kid. If there was anything that I got in trouble for, it was for talking too much.
Yeah.
Which is still kind of my problem now. But I wasn't a bad kid, but I just was a little bit wild, and um yeah, I was uh just kind of like, I love to be like the class clown. I love to make people laugh.
Yeah.
And so I'd get in trouble a lot for that. I kind of joke now and say, like, I remember the biggest thing that I got in trouble for as a little kid was like accidentally walking into the boys' restroom.
Yeah.
So like totally opposite of my husband. But I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't intentionally seek out trouble or anything like that. But I remember at a very young age feeling very like how can I put it? I remember feeling very like alone, out of place, just very alone, out of place, and I craved like a sense of belonging amongst my peers, and I think that caused a lot of depression. I remember being little and feeling sad for absolutely no reason, but
Yeah.
I couldn't put a finger on it. And I think that's why I craved that kind of attention, being the class clown and making people laugh, is because I wanted that sense of belonging and acceptance. And so I sought that out in making people laugh and being funny. And I remember being a little girl, and I remember struggling with depression. Of course, I didn't know what it was or even what that word was at the time, but I remember feeling alone. And now as an adult and looking back, I see that was kind of like a catalyst for what my life would look like as I grew older.
Yeah, what you would deal with later on.
What I exactly. So.
Yeah. So you're growing up in church, in a loving home. Obviously, I know my grandparents. It was love in a very unique way. I love you guys. Shout out Papa Bear, Grandma Rose. And I don't mean that with any disrespect, but I know that that you guys have some funny stories of just how they showed their love so much by just being a little hard on you guys, a little strict,
most definitely,
things like that. But you grew up in a home where there was love. The things of God were established.
For sure.
Would you ever say that, like, in junior high school, like, when did you have your curiosity peaked? Like, maybe there's something else, like maybe these stories, testimonies that I'm hearing.
Right.
There's more to life that
Growing up, I mean, Grandma Rose and Papa Bear were like fierce when it came to protecting us. They did everything that they absolutely could to protect us from the world. I mean, Papa Bear was super strict, which now, as I'm a parent, I'm eternally grateful for, because it did save us from a lot. He did protect us from a lot. However, the devil has a way of targeting young people, and no amount of protection. Grandma Rose, she read the Bible to us every night. I remember walking into my first day of junior high, and she stood at the door in front of she did this to every single one of us, but I was so embarrassed because she stood at the door and she spoke in tongues and laid hands on me right in front of my whole 6th grade class and prayed over me as I walked into my junior high class for the first time. And my friends are like, "What was your mom speaking?" I was like, it was Spanish. I was too embarrassed to say that it was tongues at the time. But I think it really just began slowly. I remember, for the first little bit, I was really strong when it came to my faith. I remember them calling me Jesus girl in middle school because I did share the gospel. But the older that I got and the more I got made fun of and bullied for that, the less and less I began to speak out. Yeah, and the more and more I found myself wanting to just be like everybody else.
Yeah, you kind of see the response of how people treat you or
Oh yeah.
how they look at you,
Mm.
and you feel it as soon as you step out, you evangelize as a young kid.
Mm.
Um, I recall a story that Pastor Jeremiah Wacker shares, where he gets up at his school and he preaches on the lunch table, and as soon as he steps down from when he just preached that, he was like, "Oh, what the heck? Why did you do that? Like, what is
Yeah,
wrong with
yeah,
you?"
yeah.
Like, you feel it instantly.
Yeah.
Um, so would you say that kind of pushed you away from?
Yeah, I think it was just like, I mean, being a young girl, and I know, I'm sure young boys feel this too, but the immense amount of insecurity that you begin to feel as you're growing, as you're developing into a young woman. I mean, the pressure to look a certain way, to fit in a certain way, to wear these type of clothes, to have this type of hairstyle, this and that. I mean, it just grew so overwhelming to me at the time, and I felt like here I am, and I'm over here trying to tell people about Jesus, and I'm already look awkward, already look weird, as I'm getting older, and I'm just making myself stick out even more like a sore thumb. And so I just really began to back down and not share as much and not say as much. And the moment that I just kind of stopped sharing the gospel was when I it really began to just being accepted and following the crowd just kind of became the norm for me, and just I just wanted to follow everybody else.
Yeah.
Blend in.
Was there a particular type of crowd? I'm only asking this because I know the answer.
Wait, what's the answer?
Was
Oh
there
my
like a
gosh.
particular type of kids or clique that like you kind of liked more?
That's so funny
Like, were
is
you a
because
theater kid? Were you like a I
I
don't know.
mean, that's what's so crazy is that I tried everything. It was so embarrassing because I think my husband found my old school ID, and I was trying to be like a skater girl.
You were a scene kid.
Right. I was just trying to fit in anywhere I could. And
Yeah.
it wasn't any particular. And I was the type of person that I was friends with everybody. Like, I didn't have a clique or a crew
Yeah.
because I didn't belong anywhere. And I think that's why I felt like that immense, like, sense to want to belong somewhere, because I didn't fit in here. And I tried to fit in there. And I didn't fit in with the cool kids, and I didn't fit in with the theater kids because I was, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just tried to fit in everywhere. And it never worked out, and that's it created even more insecurity, and it created even more anxiety and depression. And I remember just feeling like, yeah, just completely alone. And I remember, yeah, I remember just crying and for absolutely no reason at all, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but the just wanting that acceptance, it just created just a huge void, because it nothing could fill it. No type of friends or extracurricular activities. I got good grades. I got straight A's and B's, except in math. But yeah, I tried to impress people by doing everything, soccer, softball, um, volleyball. I was on the swim team. I was on the tennis team.
Yeah.
I did everything.
So while you were in high school and just going through these things that you're mentioning,
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, depression, and things like that, what were your siblings doing? Were they involved in church and serving God, like,
Yeah.
or were they kind of doing their own thing at the same
Yeah.
time?
So, my younger sister, well, yeah, my twin sister, she's 2 minutes younger than me, but she she always was faithful. I mean, she kind of kept to herself, and it's so crazy because I didn't even have a relationship with her in high school. Me and her didn't even speak in high school. Like, that's how much I tried to, like, disassociate myself from anything that had to do with how I was brought up, Christ, God, church, the gospel. I just totally, like, cut her off. Didn't even speak to her. Um, but my brother, he was saved at the time, but like just like a lot of church kids do, unfortunately, they go through that rebellious stage. Um, and I think all my siblings did at one point in time. So I watched all of them, and I think, yeah, I think as I was going through this, my two older sisters were saved. They had families of their own at the time, and my a couple of my siblings were going through that rebellious stage at the time, and it all seemed like one of my sisters in particular. You know which one I'm talking about. She just went like all the way in, and I was like, that's a little bit too much for me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to taste the world, but I didn't want to taste too much, just enough, just to see what it was and if it was going to suit me, if it was going to fill that void, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of a. I don't know if we can go on a tangent on this. I think it's possible, but it's a trip because when you're a church kid and you've seen, or you haven't necessarily seen, you've heard the stories through your parents,
Right.
through older siblings, and it almost seems like the things that God did in their life, it's like a fairy tale.
Right.
It's like because you haven't seen that, you haven't experienced
Right.
that.
Totally.
It's almost like it rules out of your mind entirely.
Right. I think too.
Was that the case for you?
I think so, but I would use another word rather than fairy tale. I would think there was almost like it was almost like I was desensitized.
Yeah.
Because I had seen it my whole life. I seen people like Pastor Robert Martinez come in, Pastor Joe Martinez come in, Adrian, Lisa. I mean, people with powerful testimonies who are serving God today, and it's like you hear these people stand up and you hear them give their testimony, and it's just like, as a church kid, you're like, I've heard it before.
Yeah.
I've heard that. I've seen that before. I've heard that before, and it's like this, because you haven't yet had a personal encounter. I can't speak for everybody. This is just my personal experience. But because I hadn't had that personal encounter yet with Christ, it was like mundane to me.
Yeah. And this might not make sense, but if you know, you know. You know, but you don't know.
Right. Right.
You have like the knowledge in your
For
head,
sure.
but you haven't lived it.
Absolutely.
You haven't known Christ in your heart.
Absolutely. And I think that's what it was for me. I mean, I heard all the stories. I see my parents bring people in, like just people who have, I mean, Giovanni and Jennifer. Sitting under Pastor Martinez's preaching, like, how could you not be saved? How could you not, run to the altar? But I think that's one of the things too, like, as a church kid, like,
you're blinded.
You can't just sit in church and expect or ride on your parents' coattails, or you have to have a personal encounter with Christ, and that was something that I was lacking in that time.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't seeking that out at all.
Yeah, me and Pastor Doc Kim just got done talking about that as well. It's like when you're living in sin and you're so deep into it, you truly are blinded. You're not seeing. Your spiritual eyes aren't open. It's almost like there's a coat over your eyes or a veil over your face. But so tell me a little bit about after high school. Did you still kind of operate in that cycle?
After high school, I kind of was on the verge of just not believing in God altogether.
Dang.
I had opened some doors, some new age religion, to like self-reliance and just relying on myself. There is no God. There's only willpower and just crazy things like that. I was burning sage and I was doing, just open up doors. It was just demonic, really. And I started college. I thought, well, maybe if I go to college and I make something of myself, I'll finally have that sense of belonging. I got real into like smoking weed and just really kind of I was over the party scene in high school. I kind of got into the party scene and drinking. Um, but I was over that, and I just started doing it on my own. All these so-called friends, they showed their true colors, and they weren't really friends anymore. And I was just kind of a loner, and I was just really doing my own thing at the time. I started going to college, and that was really like my motivation. I wanted absolutely nothing to do with the way that I was brought up, the traditional lifestyle, marriage, motherhood. I was repulsed by it.
It's the last thing on
I
your mind.
wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Joke's on me.
Well, in that time, you said you opened the door to a couple of, you know, I'll just say it, just demonic things.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
opened doors. Did you ever have any conviction towards that, or was it just kind of like in spite of the way you were brought up?
Right. I think that everything that I was taught growing up, I did the absolute opposite of.
Yeah.
And it was in spite. I felt like I didn't have an option, and I my parents shoved this down my throat, and I wanted to choose for myself, and so I sought out the furthest thing from Christianity, or what I thought to be the furthest thing from what I was how I was raised and how I was brought up, political party, everything.
Yeah.
Just complete opposite, and in hopes of, and really what it was is I mean, when the Bible when the Bible talks about that scripture, and it says, train up a child in the way that they should go, and they won't depart from it. This stuff that was put in me, it was in me. Like, it was in me. I remember being the furthest away that I could be from God, and I would see someone who was like worse off, or what I thought to be worse off than I was, and still directing them to the potter's house, and then walking away and being like, what the heck? Why did I do that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that that's really what it means. Like, this stuff
You were
was
doing the Great Commission. You weren't even saved.
right. I'm over here like being a dummy, but it's just like this stuff was in me. So, and I couldn't stand it. Like, I could not stand it. Guys would come around, and I just knew if if I was to open that door and, commit a fornication, I would die right there and go to hell. Like, I just was like that terrified. Like, it was just in me, and so God spared me from that. And yeah, but I did open those doors, and I did try everything in my power to get as far away from what I knew.
Did you ever have any like demonic encounters
Oh yeah.
while opening those
Oh
doors?
yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. I remember I was like couch surfing, and I was at one of my friend's house, and I couldn't sleep. Like, I had the worst insomnia ever. I could never go to sleep. And the only way that I could go to sleep was with the TV on. And I remember sleeping, and I remember turning my back towards the TV because I was sleeping on the couch, and I remember I felt just this presence standing over me, and it just felt like a thickness, like the room was jam packed, and I felt like a thickness. And I turned around, and there was somebody, just a shadow, and it was standing over me. And my first instinct was to reach out and grab it. And as I did, there was nothing there. And but once again, I was so desensitized. Like, I mean, now if something was like that, something like that, I would immediately cry out to God. I would immediately, start praying. But I had such, like you said, it was like I was just so desensitized to all that. I remember just the situations that I put myself in. I put myself in so many situations where something horrible could have happened to me. Getting like super, super drunk and blacking out and around people who I did not know, friends who did not care about me. You know, it was just, I was just on a path of destruction without even really realizing it. You know, I just the need for to fill that void led me on this path of just trying to grasp at anything to try to fill it, whether it be education, whether it be false religion, whether it be drinking, drugs, relationships, you know. And it was like, yeah, it was just, I think back and I'm on so many different occasions where something could have happened to me. I put myself in vulnerable situations, and I'm like, God really spared me, you know. He
Yeah.
really did, because I was young. I was just reckless with my life.
And how long did you kind of operate in that recklessness?
Um, it was a while. It was a while, maybe for about where this was right before I went into college and a little bit after. Um, but it was so exhausting. Like, it was so exhausting. Like, it was tiring. Like, keeping up with the parties, living for the weekend. I don't know how people do it. I don't know how I did it. But it was just tiring, you know.
Yeah, and
And it got to a point where I was like, no, I'm not gonna. I just started drinking by myself in my house, smoking weed by myself in my house, and it got to a point where I didn't need all these people around me to do it. It was like, okay, that's not, because when the party was over and the music was off and everybody went home, it was still me by myself. So I just started doing it all by myself, you know.
yeah. And throughout that time, obviously, like I said in the beginning, you grew up in a family rooted in the Potter's house, rooted in the things of God. Obviously, when one of their family members isn't saved, even to this day, we're constantly involved in talking about the things of God and
Right.
telling them, that they don't have to live that way and they can have Jesus as well. Were any of your family members reaching out to you at that time?
Of course, my parents always were.
Do you remember when I was little and I'd come up to you
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
would say, "Are you coming back to church?"
Yeah, I remember my sister Antoinette always did. She always witnessed to me. She always just told me she's itty bitty, tiny, small, but one thing about her, she'll tell you like it is. And she'd always just get in my face and tell me like it is, you know, and she just was never afraid, never backed down. But for the most part, it was really easy for me to stay away
Yeah,
because it was so convicting. Just they didn't even have to say anything, but just staying away was what I did, because it was easier to stay away than come around and face that conviction,
yeah,
you know. So, um I did that as much as I could.
yeah. It's much easier to stay away from it because you don't feel it
Right.
as much. Even Pastor Barry now, he'll say, "You don't feel the Holy Ghost all the way in the back of the church." You know,
Yeah.
and it's even more so outside of the church. Especially Ogden. You run into everybody from church
Oh yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to like go outside the borders of
I
Ogden to
remember
not run into somebody.
I would run into D Block, and I was like, oh gosh.
Shout out D
I
Block.
would run into D Block at Weber State, and he'd be like, hey, and he'd try to witness to me. I'd run into this person and that person, and I would just kind of put my head down. It was just convicting, even looking at these people that I used to go to church with, or who knew what I was really about, and just would be like, what the heck are you doing out here in the stinking world? Like, this is not for you, you know?
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if you mind sharing this, but uh, I can cut this out later if you don't want to. But I remember you were telling me that there was someone that actually came up to you at a party and said, like, "What are you doing?" Like,
Yeah.
are you comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a friend of mine. Um, And I remember I was just cutting up at a party. And like I said, everybody knew Ogden is a small place. It's not, a huge, or at least it was. I know it's gotten bigger since I left, obviously. But after some years, anyways. But I remember just going out there and trying to do my thing, and somebody actually came up to me and was like, "What are you doing here?" And I remember feeling so stupid, like, and being so embarrassed by that. But there was even sinners who knew that I didn't fit in this crowd and I didn't belong here. But I was trying so hard to put on a mask and fake like I did just to try to belong and fit in. And it's just so crazy because now, as I'm saved and I'm matured in my walk with God, you know, I don't need to fit in. Like, God accepts me for exactly who I am. And if I would have just recognized that back then, it would have saved me a lot of heartache and a lot of grief. But I think that's one of the strategies of hell. I mean, I always say this, but look at the LGBTQ, ABCDEFG community, whatever it is now.
Yeah.
That's their whole thing. We accept you for who you are.
Yeah.
We love you for who you are. You could be ugly as sin. You could be whatever. But if you claim to be a part of what we're a part of, we'll accept you with open arms. And I always feel like that's the devil's strategy, especially amongst church kids, who you have a calling on your life from the moment that you're born into that church, or like your parents have been praying for you ever since you were in the womb, and there's a calling on your life. If the devil can get you to believe that you don't belong in the very place where you were born and raised in, if he can get you to believe that, then that's half the battle right there. Because you won't look to you won't feel comfortable. And I think that's really what the devil's strategy was for me. You don't belong here. You don't fit in here. Go look for somewhere else to fit in.
Yeah.
you know
It's a trip, Anything that is branded with acceptance, or, just tailored to what you like,
yeah
it'll get you. It'll pull you right out of church, pull you right out of the will of God.
For sure. 100%.
And so I I think that story is really cool, honestly, because the testimony that the Ogden congregation has built is so known throughout the city of Ogden.
Yeah.
Backsliders know it. That people know the testimony of this church, and it's mind blowing when I hear things like that. Like, people who still have that, like, conviction, even though they ain't been saved for years.
Yeah.
And they'll run into people that are, and it's like,
I would be anywhere or just whatever, and they'd be like, "Aren't you Bear's daughter?" And I'm like, no. Or like, just things
Bear's
like that.
daughter.
And it would just be like, there's no escaping, like,
that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. What's it like being Bear's daughter?
Don't get me started. No, just kidding.
No, I'm just playing. So, you were in college at that point, right? And when did you finally come to a point where it was like, all right, I surrender?
Yeah. I don't know if I ever got to that point, to be honest. I think that I kicked and bucked and as hard as I could. It wasn't. I was exhausted. I was tired of like trying to keep up and put on this front. My sister was saved at the time, and I was at her house, and I didn't have anywhere to live. I was like homeless. I was literally just couch surfing from place to place, riding my bike around like a little weirdo that I was. Shaved with my shaved head. No, just kidding.
I remember that.
Yeah. And with my nose piercings and my gauges, and I was just a mess, like a hot mess. And like I said, I did every trendy thing at the time just to try to fit in. But I went to my sister's house and I had this jar of weed, and I like hid it in her house. It's horrible. But I fell asleep and stinking Quillen. No, just kidding. She took it. She found it. I don't know how she found it, but she dumped it down the toilet. And
Well, we'll hear that part when we do her podcast. No, just kidding. Until next time.
she threw it down the trash, and so I was so mad. I was so angry. But anyways, that's besides the point. My sister invited me to church, and I didn't have absolutely nothing to do, and I don't know how the heck I even got in the car and found myself on the way to church because I was so opposed. But I ended up on my way to church, and they were taking this visitor with them too. And this guy was weird. He was like I was weird, but this guy was weird. And they were bringing him to church, and I was all annoyed because I had to sit by him in the back of the car. And I got to church, and it was a Chris Hart revival. And I remember I wore like the shortest dress that I could possibly wear, just trying to be, obnoxious about it. But I sat there and he began to preach, and I remember feeling so angry. Like I just had all this. I was mean. That was the other thing too. I was mean. I didn't care who you were. You could have been an old lady. You could have been an old man. I was mean. I purposely wanted to be evil and mean and spiteful to anybody, and I can use my words to do it. But I was an angry, bitter person, and Chris Hart began to preach, and he began to, like he does, speak to me, like give me a word in his preaching. And I was so mad. I was I literally felt like my skin like getting hot. That's how angry I was.
Dang.
And as he began to say things that nobody could have ever known, things that I remember as that little girl crying who was depressed and felt that loneliness, he began to talk about those moments that I had with God. And nobody knew this. Nobody knew about the suicidal thoughts that I struggled with. Nobody knew about the times that I was completely desperate and alone, and the emptiness that I felt, and just struggling with things like that. Nobody knew any of that. And he began to tell me these things that only God would know. And right then and there, I made up my mind that God is real. And not only is he real, he's real to me because he knows me. And he's a personal God. And that anger slowly began to dissipate. And it felt like it was just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that anger turned into relief. Like almost like a deep breath, like I don't have to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I don't have to put up this front. I don't have to try to belong anywhere. I don't have to, none of that. And from there, I remember going to the altar and just sobbing, weeping before God, and it was like all of that was just broken. That hard exterior that I created for myself, it just broke right then and there, and I just wept at the altar. And I remember, I think it was Pastor Eli. He was on the platform, and he was like, "Wipe your nose." but that I didn't care. I was just broken before God, and I was so grateful that I didn't have to keep up the charade that I had been trying to put up for so long. So, yeah.
And ever since then, it was.
Yeah, I just remember like trying to go as hard as I could for God. Like,
Yeah, Doc Kim was speaking a little bit about it. You were in everything, on every outreach, drama team, singing
yeah,
at the concerts.
yeah. I think I couldn't wait to get in ministry. I couldn't wait to do something for God. I just was so on fire. Like God had just like blown me away. Like just the way that God revealed himself to me. I remember one time in particular, I was working at Weber State because I still worked there. I was going to college there and I still worked there. And I came into work, and this is just one of the examples of the way that God like made himself so real to me, because I remember praying like, God, just show, I just want to see you and know you and show me that you're real. So I'm praying, I'm going to work, excuse me, and as I'm walking into my work office, I used to clean the Weber State buildings before I went to school. And my coworker, I hear her, she's sobbing in the, this was a Saturday morning, she's sobbing in the office. And I'm like, Dolores, are you okay? And she's like, oh, no, I'm not okay. She's a Mormon lady. She said, my son just tried to commit suicide. I don't know what to do. I'm going to send him to his dad's. I just don't know what to do with him anymore. Da, 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 da. And we had a concert that night, so I invited her to the concert. I prayed with her. She didn't want to pray with me, but I just prayed for her in her situation. And at the time, I didn't have a car, so after I cleaned the Weber State buildings, I would take the bus. I would go to either Crystal Bartleson's house or something like that, or just hang out. I think I went on a hike. So that was like at 4 in the morning. I would clean Weber State. Yeah. So I'm just taking the buses around the city, just running errands, doing whatever. And I'm walking down the street, and I see this man, and he's walking past me, and it's like July, I think. And he's wearing a trench coat, and it's stinking hot. Yeah. And he walks right past me, and God spoke to me, witness to that guy. And I'm like, what? No. I'm like, he's wearing a trench coat and it's July. What if he's an axe murderer? Yeah. And God spoke to me again, and he said, witness to him. And I kept walking, and I said, okay, God, if you tell me to witness to him again, I'll really do it. And God spoke to me again, and so I turned around and said, hey, and I called him. And one thing about me, when I first got saved, I was a witnessing machine. I would witness on the bus. Everywhere I went, I was telling somebody about Jesus. And I began to witness to him, and I began to, and it wasn't a super elaborate witness or whatever, but I just began to tell him that Jesus loves him, and he just began to weep, right then and there. And he was like, you're an angel, God sent you to me, you're an angel. And I'm like, oh, no. But I'm like, hey, we got this concert, come to the concert tonight, da 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 da. And I was like, wow, that was powerful, and went on with my day. It's the concert, and it's a concert, and I see my coworker. I'm getting ready to go up. I think I'm in the opener or something like that. I see my coworker. I'm like, hey, Dolores, you made it. And behind her, she brought her son. And I literally froze. Her son was the man that I witnessed to on the street. Dang. Right then and there. This is hours later. So here I am at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm witnessing to Dolores. She's desperate. She's broken. I'm praying for her and her son. Hours later, it's maybe like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, after my hike, after I go visit my friend or run my errands, I run into her son, and I'm able to witness to him and lead him in a center player. When I tell you, I stopped dead in my tracks, and it was just like God spoke to me right then and there and was like, this is what I can do. Wow. He completely orchestrated that whole entire thing, and I'll never, for as long as I live, I'll never forget that. I think I ran to Pastor Martinez, and I was like, Pastor. and I told him, and he was like, yeah. I don't even think he was surprised. He was like, yeah, that's what God can do. And it was just so incredible to me. But God just revealed himself to me over and over and over and showed me I am real. Wow. I'm not the God of your dad. I'm not the God of your mom. I'm not the God of this elder in the church and this elder or Pastor Martinez. I'm your God, and I'm real. And he revealed himself to me time and time and time again.
That's Holy Ghost.
Yeah, it was crazy. I'll never forget it.
That's super cool. I mean, oh man, I don't even know how do I follow up with that? I mean, it's so awesome to hear those encounters and those stories like that, because God's real.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. Like, I always used to, and I would test God too as a new convert.
Like, all right, God.
Yeah, I really would. I'd be like,
No, you know what would trip me out? There were times where I'd be like, all right, God, if this is from you or you want me to do this, have D Block interpret the interpret the tongue or something like that. And it would always
yeah, I would, because like as a church kid, like I'm saying, I think it comes back to like that, like, okay, God, like I've been seeing this my whole life, but I'm just experiencing it for the first time. I want to
yeah.
know that you're real, you know?
Yeah.
So I'd be driving or whatever, and I'd see somebody walk by, and God would deal with me to witness to them, and I'd be like, if I see them again, I'll know it's you. And then lo and behold, I would see the same person at the store, and I'd be like, well, like, and God would just deal with me or reveal himself to me like that in that way.
Yeah.
And it was just incredible,
Yeah.
honestly.
So we covered the portion of your testimony and the upbringing, the beginning stage of your life. I want to talk a little bit about how Pastor Doc Kim comes into the picture because and you don't have to go crazy into detail.
Yeah.
You can kind of summarize it or
Yeah.
whatever you're comfortable with. So he told me a little bit. Um, he didn't really come after you. I shouldn't say come after you. He didn't really pursue you until about he
Right.
was like almost like a year and some change
Right.
saved.
So this is what I'll say. Like, being a young convert and being a young woman, I so desperately wanted the will of God for my life. And I think for a long time I idolized marriage. I put it on a pedestal. And it makes me laugh now because now that I am a married woman, I had no idea what I was even idolizing, you
Yeah.
know? I didn't know how to cook. I didn't know how to do nothing, but yeah, I wanted to get married so bad. But I think too a lot of young women in church can like identify with that because it's like, wow, I want to be a pastor's wife, or I want to be this and I want to be that, and it's like, now that I am married, one thing that I can say is that, like, there's a benefit in really letting God work on you while you are single, and
Yeah.
like preparing yourself. Like, I always tell young women, like,
Yeah. Well, while we're on that subject, I do
go
want to
ahead.
ask, um, what what's a piece of advice that you would give to a young woman right now? Maybe there's one listening that aspires to be a pastor's wife that is,
Oh yeah.
idolizing marriage and things like that, like how you said you did.
Right. So, first of all, one piece of advice that was given to me that I wish I would have listened to a little bit better is that when you do get married, like when the Bible calls a wife the helpmate, like that you're going to be your husband's helper, like, and not in a helper like in a slave way, like you're going to help him, you're going to teach him some things, you guys are going to both grow together. But to me, what was told to me is that means your husband is going to be in a position where he needs help. So therefore, you need to be preparing yourself, like you need to get as close to God as you possibly can. Like, stop idolizing marriage so bad, and that's being completely consumed with it. And in this moment, in this time of singleness, prioritize your relationship with God. Get close to God. And that's one thing that I didn't do. I'll be honest. I wasn't the best at, because I was so, oh, I'm going to be in there. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And in that secret place where I could have been really asking God, help me with this, because I don't want to bring this attitude or this temperament or this into my marriage, help me, prepare me for this. I could have really utilized that time when I was single to do that, and God's gracious, it doesn't mean that if you're married now and you weren't the best at that you're you can't still prioritize your relationship with God. But that would be some advice that I would give, like,
Yeah.
just really don't overlook this time of you being single as like, oh, I just want to hurry up and get married. Like, time's ticking, clock's
Yeah.
ticking. Really prepare yourself. It's the man that should be looking, not the woman,
Yeah.
you know.
So
So,
back to your story. Um, what was going through your mind when Doc Kim was bringing you chocolate and water and things like that?
well, I'll be, to be honest, I was kind of embarrassed, but I was like, hey, free chocolate.
He said that back in the day, you and Sister Misa, you guys used to be like real like mockers.
Yeah, we like, I think
You guys would call him Doc Kimberly.
yeah. So I honestly, to be honest, I think it was Tia Shelley when he first came into church who was like, I mean, and you know how some people can be like, hey, look at so. And I think I remember when he first came in, like when Archie brought him to that concert, I was singing with Miko. I always joke with him and tell him like that's why you got saved because I was singing. No, just kidding. But I remember what he was wearing. I remember how like drunk he looked. But yeah, I remember his dreads. I remember all of that. But I think Tia Shelley was the one who was like, hey, like after he had been saved for a minute, and she's like, hey, what about Doc Kim? And I was like, oh, he's rude, because he was really rude. but yeah, we used to mock him. I really didn't have any interest in him other than just wanting to get to know him like I would want to get to know anybody who was new in church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wasn't particularly like interested in him. I mean, like I said, I did have marriage on a pedestal and I was always thinking about it, but
What about when he began to like pursue? Did it kind of like shift like, whoa, this is new, like
yeah, so
someone's
it was kind of funny cuz I was just telling somebody this the other day, but I was leaving the church and I knew something was about to happen because a group of the brothers were like off to the corner and they were all kind of like whispering and Doc Kim was over there and I was walking to my car and he came up to me and it was so random. But he came up to me and he was like, I'm going to preach the gospel. And I was like, okay. He's like, I'm just letting you know right now that I'm going to preach the gospel one day. And if you're not willing to follow me, and mind you, like, I never talked to this guy. Like, I wasn't interested in him. I didn't like him, like nothing. And he just started going off, and I was like, what? But I was like, low key, like, oh.
you're too much.
But I was like, oh, okay. But
Oh my gosh.
but I was like, what in the world? But he's like, I'm gonna preach the gospel, and I just want you to know ahead of time I have a call in my life, and I am interested in you, and I just want to know if you'd be interested, if you're interested in me. And I was like in general, I'm interested, and he was like, in general, but I was like, yeah, like I'll get to know you. If you want to get to know me, I'll get to know you, and that was kind of how.
That's so funny. That's like such an intelligent, like smart way to answer. Like,
Yeah.
my interest is in general, like I'm generally interested,
Yeah,
but not
yeah,
like
yeah. I couldn't give myself away. I just had to be like, play it cool,
yeah. So, you guys courted, and then you guys, eventually, what year did you guys get married?
We got married in 2019.
2019.
The courtship we courted. Courtship was a rough courtship. I'll be honest, and I say that because I think, like I was telling you earlier,
Yeah.
I think there's so much hope in when people are honest and they keep things real. And I didn't want to get on here and try to like, without going into like all the details and stuff like that. We had a long courtship. We had broke up at one point in time. Duckham really struggled with, I'm like putting him on blast. No, just kidding. But he really struggled with jealousy at the time. And I remember, and I say this because I think it was a good piece of advice that Pastor Martinez gave me for anybody who's courting out there. But he told me, I went to him and I told him, like, Pastor, this is what's going on. And, you know, Duckham gets really jealous or upset or whatever. And I just wasn't sure how to handle that because I had never been in a relationship in the world. It was something that I like messed around with and dabbled in, but this was like my first serious, like, committed relationship.
Yeah.
And so I went to Pastor Martinez and he told me something that I'll never forget. He said, there's a possibility that God can change Duckham. He said, but there's also a possibility that Duckham won't allow God to change him. And you have to make a decision whether or not you'll be willing to live with this for the rest of your life, because God can change him. But the question is whether or not Duckham is willing to be changed by God.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's such a good piece of advice, especially to young people who are young and who are courting, and you know, so yeah, so Pastor Martinez gave me that advice. It was probably the best advice that he could have ever gave me, because it really made me think about things. And then so we broke it off for a little while, and then we had ended up getting back together. And Dakim really allowed God to work on him when it came to that aspect. And I remember actually seeing him and seeing like the wheels turning in his head, like, like, God help me. When it came to stuff like that. But I mean, he got dominion over it, and that was great. Unfortunately, in our courtship, we had fallen into sin. We had got put on discipline, and we came back after some time, and God completely restored us. And just one thing that I want to say briefly about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was honestly the hardest time throughout my whole life. One of the hardest times throughout my whole life. Just falling from God's covering and God's grace, experiencing such a high, like, in my salvation and getting saved and experiencing God's love and grace, and then finding yourself so far from that is just a place that it was almost worse. Like when the Bible talks about like 7 times worse, or and you open those doors back up again and it's just that much worse. It really was. And I thank God for his grace. I thank God for Pastor Martinez for being gracious with Duckham and I, and allowing us back into church when he did. And just, if it weren't for people like Pastor Barry and Monica, who really took the time to just restore us, pray for us, be there for us, and just different people in the congregation who just welcomed us back with open arms, and just really restored us. And I feel like, God, like, the devil knew our potential as a couple, and he targeted us. And because we let certain boundaries slip, it just began to open that door. And it's so crucial as a young man and young woman. And this is something, once again, it goes back to being a church kid and hearing Pastor Martinez say things like, guys and girls can't be friends, and being like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, or just, sitting under the preaching and hearing about our standards and why we do things the way that we do things, until you like experience it. It's like, oh, that's why we do that that way.
It doesn't click.
That's why we make sure those standards are put in place to protect you. Yeah. Those standards, and people like, think that we're being legalistic, and it's like, no, like, those are safeguards to protect you. And when you don't take things like that serious, you make yourself susceptible to what the devil wants for you and what he intends for you. You know, he hates righteousness, he hates purity, and he'll target you in it. And unfortunately, we fell into sin. But like I said, God's grace is sufficient. He covered us. We 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 did everything in our power while we were on discipline to try to stay connected to a gospel preaching church, and we found our way back. And I'm so grateful for those people who who played a part in our restoration. You know, and I don't think we would be here today if it weren't for people like the Berries, my parents, Pastor Martinez, Sussy, Big Dog, Whitney, um, you know, people who really loved us when we came in with our heads hanging low and felt all the condemnation in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you said 2019 you guys got married.
So, yeah, we got married in February 2019.
You eventually had your
Right.
first child.
Yep, I was pregnant with Zion. And I did not know that Zion was going to be Zion until after he was born.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure everybody knows by now, but Zion was born with severe brain damage that resulted in cerebral palsy. And so it was like we came back into church in March. We were married in February, came back to church in March, and had Zion in August. And it was like, it was just, oh my goodness. It was just, as I look back, I don't even know how we made it through all of that. It was just so traumatic. And,
yeah.
you know,
If you don't mind sharing, just for people who aren't aware, can you recall any of the challenges just as a Christian woman that you faced, you know, having a child with cerebral palsy, like
yeah.
mentally, like
Yeah.
I'm sure the devil had to have been
yeah,
trying to
he
play with your mind.
definitely played on that. Well, one thing that really stuck out to me is like, it's one thing to say like, I have faith and I believe. You know, you can sing like, I will praise you through the storm.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like when you're actually going through something like this, like, and not only, what was so hard for me is like, this is an innocent child who was completely helpless. So watching your child go through something like this, being poked and being prodded, and he spent time in the NICU, but coming right back to church, I was still dealing with the condemnation. I was still dealing with, you know, all kinds of things. And the devil really played on that because I was really vulnerable at the time. He really played on, you know, my faith, like, you know, this is what you get, that type of thing. And I remember, I honestly wish that I could say that I had, you know, the utmost faith, and I was just like, no, like, God this and God that. But I really struggled. I really remember struggling, and I really remember questioning God and being like, God, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand, like, you know. And God really dealt with me. And I remember being angry at God at times. I remember being full of faith at times. And it just felt like a roller coaster. Like, my faith was really shaken at the time. And I really had to get a hold of myself, and I had to get a hold of God. And I had to, one thing that, this was a couple months down the road, but I remember we were out of the hospital. Zion was home. We didn't know that what all was going to happen, or what he was going to look like, or we just recently had the diagnosis. And I remember Zion is a totally different kid. I don't know if you remember, but there was a point in time where he would not sleep. He could not eat. I couldn't put him down. I would be up till like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. trying to put him to sleep. And he would, anytime I put him down, he would startle. So I'd have to put like weighted blankets on him. He couldn't self soothe. It was just really, really hard. And I remember crying out to God at like, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was almost, like shaking my fist at God. Like, God, why? Why does he have to go through this? Why do we have to go through this? Sorry.
No, it's okay.
But God spoke to me at that time. And he told me, like, you can't manipulate me with your anger. I'm not moved that way. And it just brought me back to that scripture where it said, like, it's our faith that pleases God. You know, sometimes we try to manipulate God with our emotions. If I'm angry at God enough, he'll move and he'll do what I want him to do. And I think that's what I was doing at the time. Yeah. If I can be sad enough, or, I don't do what God calls me to do, then he'll do what I want him to do. And as women, we get mad at our husbands. I'm not talking to him, and then, he'll do what I want. And that, I think that's what I was trying to do to God at the time.
Yeah.
And God spoke to me, and he dealt with me, and he said, I don't move that way.
Dang.
You don't move me that way. It's your faith that pleases me. And I look back, and it's like, I remember the first time I put Zion to sleep. I think I have a picture where I was able to lay him down, and he was able to go to sleep on his own. No weighted blanket, no medication, no nothing. And I could lay Zion down today, and he'll take a nap by himself. He'll self-soothe by himself, and he'll go to sleep by himself. So God has moved in a lot of different ways. Amen. Not in the ways that I expected him to or even wanted him to.
Yeah. But
he's shown me so much more than what I ever thought that I would see. God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And he's shown me that through my son,
Yeah. You ever feel like sometimes, like when God moves in our favor, it almost feels like it's too good to be true.
Yeah.
Whether it's his grace or just a miracle that like we didn't even think was possible. It's like, God, this is like,
yeah,
this has to be like too much. Like it just seems too good to be true.
Yeah. Those early days, I remember leaving the hospital and the doctor's telling me, your son might not make it till 1. He might not live. He won't breathe on his own. He won't eat on his own. He won't ever laugh. He won't ever smile. Like, these were the things that were told to me, and we actually got the option to take him off of the medication and let him pass on his own. And of course, we opted out of that. And Zion's going to be 5 in August. If you know Zion, you know that he's one of the most happiest kids ever. He smiles. He has a nickname Smiley in St. Louis because he's always smiling.
Yeah.
He eats on his own. Like, God has just blown us away. Like, everything that the doctor said he wouldn't do, he does,
Yeah.
Almost everything. And so it's just like, I think that I remember somebody asked me this question, like, what are you going to do if God chooses not to heal Zion? And I was like, wow, like, what do you mean? Like, I'm going to serve God, And I think that I know that my God, and I know that he could heal Zion. But I know that that's faith right there. Me speaking those words is faith. But I also know if he chooses not to heal Zion, for whatever reason that may be, and I still believe and I still serve God, that's faith too. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. God, we know that you can deliver us from this fire. We know that you can deliver us from this King Nebuchadnezzar. We know that you can set us free. But if not, we're still going to serve you.
Or even Job in the Bible.
Right, yeah.
Even if you slay me, I'll
I think that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that kind of faith because it's a real hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
To say, okay, God, it's up to you, your will. I'm still going to serve you, though. It's easier to say, the opposite. I know God's going to do it. And okay, but what
Yeah.
if God doesn't? Are you still going to serve him?
I always think of this thing that Scott Lamb said in one of his sermons. He says there's two parts to faith. The part one is the part that everybody can do. Everybody can be like, just put it in God's hands, brother, or just surrender it to God. Have faith, believe.
Mm-hmm.
That's part one. But part two comes when it's like how you're saying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You are in the fire. There is no visual hope. There is no light at the end of the tunnel,
Right.
and still believing God, like, God, you are going to get me through this.
Right.
Manifesting it with your words and with the way you view God.
100%.
That's part two of faith.
Yeah, and I had to learn that. I had to really learn that. Like, God, okay, God, this is completely up to you, and I'm going to trust you, whatever your decision may be.
Yeah. So, we covered, a little bit of after marriage. I want to kind of come to a conclusion and talk a little bit about the present. When did you guys get launched out?
Was it 2023 or 2022?
2 years ago. I just
2023.
Yeah, 22.
2022.
2 years ago.
Yeah, so about 2.5 years ago, we answered the call to take over the church in Hazelwood, Missouri.
Yeah. So you've had a little, no, I shouldn't say a little, sorry. In the last 2 years, you have experience. You guys are seasoned out in the field.
I don't know if I would say that.
Well,
we've had a baby amount of experience. We got a little taste.
In that time, these are we have subscribers that send in questions.
Right.
I let some people know that are subscribed to the show that I'd be doing an interview with you. One of the questions that were sent in was, give me a sec. What's some advice that you would give to a pioneer pastor's wife who's fresh? Maybe it's a first church. What's some advice that you would give to a woman to help her lead, or not lead? I read it wrong. I'm getting ahead of myself. To help her husband lead. So it's kind of like 2 in 1.
Yeah. Some advice I would give is just some advice that was recently given to me is just be confident in the calling. I think sometimes, and I've heard women say this before, like, oh, my husband's called. Well, you're called too, sis. Like, you and your husband are one, and if you go with that confidence of knowing, like, we're called and I'm, I'm a part of what God is doing and what God is going to do. And if you go with that confidence, then I think that's helpful, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, like God chose you, but like not only did he choose you, but the specifics for these people, for such a time as this, for this place. And I remember going to St. Louis for the first time, and I'm a lot younger than some of the women who have been coming into our church. They seemed so much more experienced. The culture's different. I was just telling somebody this, like, they're real big on like black culture,
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm black, but I'm not like black. Like a lot of people say, like, black isn't just about being black; it's the culture. You hear that a lot out there, and so that was kind of intimidating because a lot of people out there, if they feel like, just my experience, if they can't relate to you, then sometimes they won't receive from you.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of people gravitate towards my husband because they feel like they can relate to him, but necessarily they didn't necessarily feel like they could relate to me. And so I struggled a little bit with being intimidated and not having like the confidence of knowing if I was right for these people. But Pastor Martinez just told me to be confident and know that I am for those people. And it's God who called me for those specific people. One thing that I would say for to help, like, just let your husband lead. The biggest lesson that I've learned is just to be quiet. Just shut your mouth. Just don't, there's times where you're going to want to say something and you're going to want to, like, no, that's not how they do it. Or that's not, we shouldn't, and it's like your husband isn't going to be perfect. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to do things that you don't agree with. But those are lessons that he needs to learn, and there's been times where it's exactly that. He learns. I've wanted to say something, but God spoke to me and just been like, just hold off, And then later on, my husband's like, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. And I'm like, yeah. But then there's times where I've spoke up and I've said something and it's, caused conflict or whatever. And not always, but, I think that there's some lessons that, are valuable for your husband to learn.
Yeah.
It's different doing things in Ogden. And like, I've grown up in Ogden. Like, I always tell like people like this fellowship is in my blood. Like, I know it, like it's who we are. It's what we've grown up around. There's a lot of things that we know, but it's different when you get out there and it's like, you almost feel like kind of scatterbrained at first, like a baby walking with new legs, and it's like, you're going to make some mistakes. You're not going to do everything perfect. And it's just like, let your husband take the lead and then also let him take the rebuke. No, just kidding. But yeah.
Yeah. It's so awesome. Just looking back at everything you guys have been through, and you guys have come a long way. The way both of your stories tie into each other is awesome. But also, just seeing what God has done in your church now.
Yeah.
I was able to, I was telling Doc Kim this, just hang out with some of your guys' church people, and it's almost just like hanging out with people in Ogden, and it's truly incredible to be a part of it, to see your guys' fruit. But I do have to ask, I also asked Sister Mandy this because some of the preachers and the people that have been sent out of Ogden, these guys, these men, disciples that are preaching now, they're conference preachers now.
Yeah.
And now your husband is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? Was that what was going through your mind? Was it, proud moment? Are you proud?
Oh yeah, most definitely. I was really proud of him, but I was also nervous for him.
You're like, freaks, don't say anything embarrassing.
And he did. No, just kidding. but yeah, it was a proud moment. I see my husband wake up every morning at 4:00 in the morning, read his Bible, pray, go to prayer, and I see him content. I see everything behind the scenes that people don't see. And so, I know how much of a privilege it was for him to preach at conference and for Pastor Martinez to give him the opportunity to speak on what God laid on his heart. I know that was meant a great deal to him and to me as well. So it was exciting to see what God is doing. More than that, it was exciting to see all of our people come and how they,
They got stirred.
They really got stirred.
I was talking with some of them, and I was like, "You guys excited to go back home outreach?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna tear it up. We're gonna reach the world. We got that new building," and they're all hyped. It's so cool.
Yeah, they're so funny. I love them to death. They crack me up. But yeah, it was fun. I think that was cooler than anything, it was just to see them, like, you know, like I was focused on the conference, but I kept like looking at them like
See
with
their
one eye, like,
reactions.
oh, what are they thinking? What are they, you know? And they loved it, and they got stirred, and they were excited, and so that was the highlight for me, is seeing them and the way that they reacted and the way that God helped them. So that
That's
was what
awesome.
meant a lot to me.
Well, we covered a lot. We covered your testimony. We covered, you know, the struggles and things you faced in your courtship and marriage and things like that. And uh, before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you would like to share with the world? Any shout outs, any advice, any stories, or
I think if there's anything that I would like to say is that I'm gonna try not to cry. um, Coming back to Ogden after being gone for the amount of time that I have, and I mean, in the grand scope of things, it's not that long. People have been gone a lot longer, but Ogden is the church that I grew up in, and Pastor Martinez has been my pastor since I was 10, 11. And I'm just eternally grateful for the Ogden church, the Ogden congregation, my parents, Pastor Martinez, Ceci, the Berries, people who have really just invested in my husband and I's life. I mean, I remember when we were at the hospital with Zion, and the amount of people who came up to the hospital. I think Jeff Osby came to the hospital and handed me $50. You know, like, just the way that they wrapped themselves around us in some of the hardest times in our life, and ministered to us and loved us and cared for us, and restored us. Like, it's one of the reasons why I for I pray, God, keep me and help me remember where I came from and who I was before salvation and the mistakes that I've made. Keep me humble, because I don't ever want to look at somebody any type of way, who's fallen, who's messed up, who's, because I was that person. you know we were those people
yeah,
who fell flat on our faces, and God has restored us to the utmost, and he's only going to do more. Not only God, but the Ogden congregation. And I'm just eternally grateful to see how far Ogden has come, what God has done thus far, and what he's going to continue to do. I'm so proud of Pastor Martinez and Mama Ceci. I remember when he first came to Ogden, and I think I was running in the church, and he yelled at me. And I've been scared of him ever since. No, just kidding. But just like, it's just incredible, honestly. Like, I'm just blown away. It's just so exciting to see. It's bittersweet, because I come back and I see all these faces that I don't know, but it's a good thing. So God is moving, and I'm excited. So yeah, I miss home, but I'm happy to be doing what we're doing.
amen. Well, once again, I appreciate you, and I'm glad we were able to document all of it and more to come.
Yeah.
You know,
And I love you, and I'm proud of you and Abby. And I can't wait for
for
my
us as well.
my nephew, my great nephew.
Great.
Just kidding.
No, but it's a blessing to have done these interviews with you guys, and I'm excited to next conference interview some of your guys' people.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
But I can't thank you enough, and everybody at home. We'll see you guys on the next one.